Your episode about wide receivers was definitely a hit, so definitely had to get you back. And you definitely were willing to come back because the topic is very good. We're talking about your Dallas Cowboys as we continue our divisional breakdowns here with the final installment of the NFC East. And so as we talk about the Dallas Cowboys, we look at them from a fantasy perspective. I have to ask you, Mike McCarthy, second year as the head coach. I mean, they came into 2020 with high expectations. The roster was pretty loaded, most notably on offense. We saw the offense come out in those first 5 weeks of the season. A lot of times they had to do it because of that porous defense on the other side, which they did try to address through, both free agency and the draft. I personally am not a believer in Mike McCarthy, but this division is winnable to say the least, especially when you consider the talent that Dallas has. What are the expectations amongst the fan base? How are y'all feeling? Not just about the season, but about Mike McCarthy and his potential future in Dallas.
Yeah, well, Cowboys fans, we are very, we're very realistic, right, John? Like we know, like, hey, no, I mean, to be honest, I mean, it's pretty much with this team and the way it's built, it's Super Bowl or bust. I mean, that's kind of how it has been the last couple of years. I think we missed our window. I'm more of a pessimistic Cowboy fan. I thought 2 years ago, the year that we win the divisional and we had Dak there, and that should have probably been the year, or the year Dez caught it. Like that could have been the year too, but. I think 10-7 would be a very good base for us. I mean, we have the second easiest schedule according to last year's record. So our opponents went I think they're at 45% win percentage from last year, which doesn't necessarily mean too much, but because we got third in that division, we're getting some easier opponents. So that definitely helps. So I think 10-7, a wild card, maybe compete for a conference or a division championship against probably Washington. Is not out of the question. And then if you get in the playoffs, it's all whatever, right? Like we have Dak, we could take a run, but if we don't make the playoffs, it's a colossal failure.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely playoff or bust for the Dallas Cowboys. It has to be. Even felt that way last year. I'm curious. What about McCarthy? I have to ask you. What are your thoughts on him?
I thought the choice was uninspiring when it happened. I thought that he went too safe, Jerry, when he hired him. I think that the game kind of passed McCarthy by. And then when they brought in Nolan, he was awful, and he wasn't good either. I think that McCarthy just is not. He wasn't the right fit. I wanted Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma. I thought maybe we'd offer him the bank and just say, hey, come give me a spread offense and do that. I am a little bit more optimistic about Dan Quinn, who's our new defensive coordinator. He's going to bring in a system, and he's a great defensive coordinator. He's not a great head coach, but with what he's trying to do there, we need help on that defensive side. But you're right. We're stagnant based on McCarthy. He's okay, but he's average, right? And so you're going to need that offense to step up in other places. Kellen Moore being back is big, though. I think having him back because he's a good play caller, have some continuity on that offensive side. So I'm hoping that we can limit what McCarthy is. But, yeah, I'm not a big McCarthy guy. He's okay. He's okay.
Yeah, I mean, Vegas has high expectations for you guys. I think the win total is 9.5. And that actually is the highest in the division over the Washington football team, which is sitting at 8. So you guys definitely do have these expectations. I'm glad you brought up Kellen Moore because he's somebody that I think had a huge effect on Dak Prescott and what we saw last year. Kellen Moore was given more autonomy as an offensive play caller. That was one of the deals with Jerry Jones leaving was that Kellen Moore was going to get more of his fingers on this, his hands on this offense and his fingerprint on it. And we saw Dak Prescott return from, he's obviously returning from the ankle injury, which he suffered in week 5 against the New York Giants last year. He was in the middle of what probably would have been his best season had he stayed healthy, had he stayed on that trajectory. Through 4 weeks, he was the QB2 in fantasy points per game, averaging over 30 points per game. He was on a 16-game pace of 804 pass attempts, which is absurd when you think about that. 6,760 passing yards, 36 passing touchdowns. Kevin, he's currently going off the board as the QB5 in one quarterback leagues, according to 444's aggregated ADP. Is there any reason to believe that he can't finish higher than that?
No, I think to me, he's a top 3 quarterback. So I have him ranked as QB3 in all formats, and that's just because of how consistent he is. Just look at just his career. 2016 as a rookie, he was QB6. Next year, he's QB9. 2018, QB10. 2019, QB2, and he was projected to be QB1 in last year until he dislocated his ankle and that gruesome broke his ankle injury. So realistically, he's never finished anything lower than QB10, and he's always on that trajectory of like getting in that top 5. I love him. And I was looking at the stats today. I laughed because I got to give a dig to my Giants fans out there. So he had 13 touchdowns in 5 games. Daniel Jones had 12 touchdowns in 14 games. So all my Giants people that come out here, I know you haven't. I think you're having G-Man J on to do the Giants. And
Yeah.
Why don't you mention that stat to him? Because I love that stat. That Prescott actually threw more touchdowns than Daniel Jones did.
That's definitely an interesting stat. I mean, I was looking at even Andy Dalton. It was like 2,200 passing yards in 11 games to Dak's 1,805. So it was really absurd. But I mean, I think having Dak back is huge, and that's huge for other people on the team as well. I don't think anyone suffered more from the lack of Dak in the offense than Ezekiel Elliott. If you look through Dak's first 5 starts, Zeke was the RB5 in PPR leagues and fantasy points per game, averaging just over 22 points per game. And that's with 4 games at over 20 points. The other game was just over 17, so not quite 20, but I guess we'll take it, right? But he was on pace for 102 targets and 77 receptions from Dak Prescott, not to mention the touchdown production that he was seeing. I had Ezekiel Elliott on a couple fantasy teams last year, and I used to get so upset at the beginning of the season when because Dak had 3 rushing touchdowns through the first 5 games, and I'm like, Dak keeps vulturing these touchdowns away from Zeke, and then when I'm watching the offense without Dak, and I'm like, oh wow, the only reason they got down there was because of Dak. Kevin, he's currently the RB7. Ezekiel Elliott is in terms of ADP. Are fantasy managers sleeping on Zeke?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like a homer, so I try to give as many points as I possibly can. And I think to your point, to last point about Dak and all this stuff, our defense is still going to be trash, guys. So these are going to be high-scoring games. So, like, we are a fantasy dream because all these guys on the offensive side, you're going to see still shootouts, 30, 40 points. That's why I think Dak still matters, especially here, and especially Zeke. Because when you look at Zeke, only one player has finished in the top 12 running backs for 5 times since 2015, excuse me. That's Zeke. Like, Zeke still finished last year. Why Dak was healthy, he was running back 3. So again, if you're looking at kind of what he does, and he gets those receiving yards, and he gets targets. He's not bad there. I am not a Tony Pollard stan. So if you're a Tony Pollard stan out there, I'm sorry, because I don't think he's not the handcuff like I would want. Like he's a very borderline, hey, if Zeke gets injured, okay, he's good. But he's not going to take the workload away from Zeke. I think Zeke dealt with poor line last year. Everybody was hurt. It was a terrible offensive line. Andy Dalton, Ben DiNucci was throwing the ball, like guys like that. So like when you're looking at what could have went wrong, it did. And then he still finished, I believe, at running back 11, I think, is where he kind of finished last year, or 9, somewhere in that area, depending on if you're looking at PPR or standard. So he's still a very good back. He's going to score touchdowns. So realistically, I think I have him right now at about like 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. And then you're looking at targets and receptions. He could still get those, 30 to 40 receptions. So you're still looking at a top running back. And I think he's a value. I think he's even a value in dynasty leagues.
Yeah, no, Zeke Elliott, I mean, he's just a grown man, bro. Like, and I have him as my RB5 actually. Just because when you look at, again, the workload that he's gonna get, you expected to get, I'm with you. I don't think Tony Pollard is gonna challenge him for touches or carries in this offense. I mean, he's a nice change of pace back, but Zeke Elliott is a workhorse. You just let that man work. You're right. He was the RB9 in PPR leagues in total fantasy points. It was still 14.9 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues. That's still respectable number there. It just wasn't. You drafted Zeke thinking he was a top 3 option. Some people were even saying that he was probably the safest pick in the draft. And it just turned out that he wasn't because of things that he had no control over.
Yeah.
But like we brought up Kellen Moore earlier. I think one of the things that Kellen Moore made an emphasis of, or really tried to emphasize last year, was throwing the ball to Ezekiel Elliott and the running backs. And I think that we saw that, like I said, on pace for 102 targets. That's a really high number for Ezekiel Elliott.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that can continue, if that trend can continue, then I definitely like Zeke as a value play headed into 2021, especially like you said in dynasty leagues.
Oh yeah, if you play Dynasty, I saw him go in the 5th round of the league. Like, I think Zeke's dead, according to like people out here drafting. And he's not going anywhere. Everybody out there, like, he's gonna have 2 years now. Like, yeah, the contracts, he's stuck there. So you're gonna get this year. I think in redraft, he's a great buy because I think you can get him late in the 1st round, 7, 8, 9, 10, depending on your league. And then you grab him, you have him 2nd year too, or excuse me, in that 2nd round, you could grab another running back. Those are 2 very solid pieces. And then Zeke, I think in Dynasty, he's going to be there for 2 years. There's nowhere going anywhere. He's going to put up running back 1 numbers for 2 years.
Yeah, no, Zeke is definitely a more than capable running back, and is going to be just fine. So, let's move on to the wide receiver position. CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb. Amari Cooper was the wide receiver 11 last year. Through Dak's first 5 starts, averaging 17.8 fantasy points per game. CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver 16 during that span, 17.1 fantasy points per game. Again, the first 5 starts is going to be a common theme here because the offense had made some changes, like I had said, giving more autonomy to Kellen Moore. So to me, I think it's important, even though with the small sample size, to still look at that offense to see what they were trying to do, what they were trying to accomplish, and how they were utilizing all these new players. But both of these guys were on pace for over 1,350 receiving yards. Cooper was on pace for more targets, but Lamb had the edge in yards and touchdowns. They're almost going back to back in terms of ADP. Cooper, wide receiver 13. Lamb is the wide receiver 15. Which of these guys do you prefer, and does one or potentially even both present a value to you?
I think they both are. And it's weird because I love Lamb. Like, I'm a CeeDee Lamb guy. And Cooper, for me, John, I think the hard part for Cooper for me is, like, I don't like him as a football player because I feel like he's inconsistent and doesn't make catches in big time moments. As I've watched him the last couple of years, he kind of disappears. But in fantasy, he's fine. Like, but it's hard as a fan. So if you listen to this, like, I know I'm a fantasy analyst or whatever you want to call me, but as a fan of the team, I struggle drafting Cooper on my fantasy teams because I look at him as a player, if that makes sense. Like, I'm like, he's inconsistent. He's going to throw up he'll throw up 20 points one game and he's going to throw up 0 the next. Whereas Lamb, I feel like last year, when you just look at the raw numbers like you talked about where he was at, even though he had all those changes, Ben DiNucci, Garrett Gilbert, Andy Dalton, all that, he had 74 receptions, which ranked him 2nd in rookies, obviously, Justin Jefferson. 935 yards, 2nd, and 5 touchdowns. So he still put up pretty good numbers with terrible quarterback play. And so I love that. And then also in the slot is where Lamb is going to eat. So that's kind of where I'm looking at with that. Like, he saw 101 out of his 109 season targets there, 69 of his receptions there, 877 yards. So look for him in the slot, and he's going to kill it.
Yeah, man, I definitely agree. I mean, I put my rankings out recently. Lamb is my wide receiver 8 in PPR leagues right now. I am very confident in what CeeDee Lamb can do this year in this Dallas offense, especially with Dak being back. It was just like you said, from that slot position, him and Dak it was just on cue every time. They're just running these option routes down the middle of the field, and it just seemed uncoverable. And they had already established this chemistry. And I'm with you on Amari Cooper, man. I mean, listeners of this show they'll be able to tell you when Amari Cooper comes up, I have like a conniption because he's, like you said, he's going to throw 20 points up one game, but then he'll throw an absolute dud, and he'll finish as the wide receiver. He'll finish as a wide receiver 1, but you're just not going to like how he finished as the wide receiver 1. So, yeah, I'm definitely curious to see how that plays out. Like I said, I'm betting on Lamb. You are too. Checked out your banner. That's pretty dope. Michael Gallup, though, where does he fit into all of this? Because let me say this. As much as I love CeeDee Lamb, I absolutely love Michael Gallup. I mean, I obviously love CeeDee Lamb's a better player, but Michael Gallup is to me has been um he's been a player that we've just kind of been waiting for him to become something, and it really not because of his fault. Again, Dallas spends a first round pick on CeeDee Lamb when we're expecting Michael Gallup to really take that leap. I think he was a guy that a lot of people talked about as a buy candidate going in the last year. I know I did. So I think teams would be lucky to have him as their wide receiver 2, but he happens to be Dallas's wide receiver 3. He's the deep threat in this offense. Again, through Dak's first 5 games, averaged 20 yards per reception, was on a 16-game pace of 1,100 yards on 54 catches. Now, again, because of the role, he's prone to these spike weeks and not really all that consistent. Finished as the wide receiver 38 last year on the year. But going off the board as wide receiver 44. Kevin, how do you value him heading into 2021?
Yeah, he's a tough one because, like you said, like I love Gallup, but then we got Lamb, and it's just unfortunate because he was going to be the wide receiver 2 there, and you would see all this volume, and then Lamb fell, and you have to take a guy like Lamb. I look at like last year, and he finished with 800 yards and 5 touchdowns, despite playing with both those guys and having that quarterback play that he had, like we've been mentioning. So the talent's there. I really think, it's crazy to say this because CD's on the team, but Gallup's kind of their best big play threat. Like when you watch him play and you see kind of what he can do, he's fantastic when he's going vertical. And if CD is in the slot, that puts a lot of pressure on that cornerback 2 or cornerback 3 to guard Gallup. So when you're looking at maybe defensive scripts, Gallup's going to definitely eat there. So I can see him having some big games. I think the biggest question mark I have, he's probably going to be, I don't want to say inconsistent. I just don't know if the target's going to be there realistically consistently, right? Like, okay, hey, he might get 8 targets one game because they key on, Lamb and Cooper, and looking at that, like he like last year, one game he got 12 targets, next game he got 1. Like that's kind of what I'm worried about. Like he's a good play for best ball, and I think he's a pretty good play for dynasty because, like you said, he'll be a wide receiver 2 somewhere in a couple years. I still think they move on from Cooper after this year because that contract has an out. And I think they just roll it back with CD and Gallup. But if they don't do that, I still think he goes somewhere. But I think the only thing I hesitate about Gallup is that if you're playing redraft, it's going to be a headache trying to figure out, okay, who's going to go off this week, because I'd be nervous about that. But I do think in this offense he'll finish as a wide receiver 3. Like he was borderline that last year, so that's not a bad get if you get him as a wide receiver 44.
Yeah, no, I definitely think if you're picking, I mean, deeper leagues, you're gonna have a Michael Gallup on your bench and maybe be a bye week fill in or something like that. In shallower leagues, I'm probably picking up Michael Gallup off the waiver wire for bye weeks and things like that. Or if I'm down, I'm projected to lose and I need some upside, and Dallas is in like a 55 point over under game. Let me throw Michael Gallup in my lineup. But what about from a dynasty perspective? Are you trying to buy Michael Gallup right now in the anticipation that he could either be someone else's number 2 receiver or stay in Dallas as the number 2 receiver if Amari Cooper is out?
Oh yeah, I'm buying the shit out of Michael Gallup because I believe in the talent. And I do, like I said, I think Cooper's gonna go because that contract's too big. At some point, Dallas is gonna run out of money. I think the salary cap is real. What do you think, John? I feel like I don't know. Everybody, the Saints keep kicking it down the road, and to be perfectly fair, in terms of like the Cowboys, we have some salary cap issues. We paid a lot of people, and with Dak's contract. Like, I think Cooper's going to be – if I was the Cowboys, what I would be doing right now is trying to get rid of Cooper, locking up Lamb for cheaper – or excuse me, for Gallup cheaper right now. So offer him a 2-year, $12 million deal. And then you lock him in, and you get rid of Cooper. Now you have your wide receiver 2. I mean, he literally in Dynasty, he's going as wide receiver 49. So when I'm looking at what I'm looking at – so that's too easy, I feel like, to grab him. And in trade value right now, I got him for like the 210. So – if you can do that, which in this draft class is not Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think is who I end up trading him for. I've seen him go straight up for Damian Harris in a league, and I also saw him go for Myles Gaskin. So that's kind of where his value's at. I don't mind doing that. Gaskin I like, but if you can kind of add something to that, like let's say you added a second to that, I would like to do that too. But Gallup's a good trade target, especially because I think his value has nowhere else to go but up. Like in terms of like if he leaves, if he goes somewhere else, becomes a wide receiver 2. If he's Dallas, imagine if he's Dallas's wide receiver 2. That's where the value is at. It's a little risky, but that's how you get ahead in Dynasty.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the only way I think it becomes risky is if you see a team come out and try to pay him as their wide receiver one, and try to use him that way. Because I don't think that that's the player that he is. I think he's better suited as a wide receiver too. But I think Dallas is where you see the highest ceiling there. Um, Moving on to the tight end position, man, because I mean, I have Blake Jarwin here. I have him written down, but we know Dak likes to target the tight end. It doesn't really matter who it is, to be honest. He just likes targeting in the middle of the field. We saw Dalton Schultz step in, get 31 targets in 5 games with Dak, averaged over 10 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues, and was a tight end 12 in total points through that time as well. The thought was always that Jarwin was the better athlete here, with the fact that he should recover from this ACL that he suffered in week 1. He should have no issue assuming that starting position again. So, and the ADPs kind of reflect that. Jarwin going off the board is tight end 24. Schultz is the tight end 27. Is there any value to extract here?
Yeah, this is kind of hard, man. The tight end position is so bad that like after you get to a certain point, you're just kind of hoping like, hey, yeah, I can grab him late. I mean, he's not a bad get like late, and he's probably going to be a streaming tight end in redraft, right? Like, oh hey, my guy's out. Let me go grab. Oh Blake Jarwin's on the waiver wire. Let me pick him up because I just don't think just like Gallup, the consistent targets will be there, and I think it's going to be a touchdown dependent situation. Like, oh, he had 3 catches for a touchdown. Because like we said, they will target him in the red zone. But I just will say if that offensive line is better, and Kellen Moore tends when you watch his play calling, which I've seen now the last couple of years, he likes to run the ball, but he does a lot of RPOs in the red zone too with Dak. That's why Dak gets a lot of those touchdowns. I don't know how much they're going to run that anymore after the injury. But you'll see. I don't know if the targets will be as much as we saw last year for Jarwin. I don't mind him. Schultz, I'd rather have Jarwin, to be honest. I think he is the better athlete. Schultz is fine. But again, these guys are such late wires. I don't see a reason to draft these guys in redraft. As far as dynasty goes, I guess. But even then, like their value is pretty low. But I don't mind like just filling them. But if we're being honest and being real, like I know you like to be, like after the top 8 tight ends, it's just if you're hoping any of those guys kind of break out, I don't know necessarily if Jarwin's the guy to do that. I mean, it's basically touchdown dependent option. You're praying that he gets 4 or 5 targets.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at tight ends that late, especially in redraft, we're looking for upside there. We're looking for athletes, and Blake Jarwin coming off a torn ACL does not scream upside. So, yeah, he's a guy that I will, like you said, stream off the waiver wire if the tight end I drafted doesn't do anything for me through the first week or two. And hey, Blake Jarwin got 7 targets last week, then I'll go scoop him up. But
I mean, to be fair, wouldn't you rather have like Gerald Everett or Chris Herndon?
Yeah, no, I would. I mean, don't even bring up Chris Herndon. You already know how the feelings I have there. But no, being serious, absolutely. Gerald Everett, I think, screams. He's the guy that we're looking for when we talk about the upside, right?
Yeah.
Like athletic guy, got a quarterback upgrade, going to a better offense, all these different things. So yeah.
And that's kind of where they're going. Like they're going after Jarwin. And in terms of like upside, I actually like Everett way better. Herndon's there, like I said. And then after that, it gets kind of whatever. We got Tim Tebow down there. I don't think I'm going to draft Tim Tebow. But you guys got those 2 guys I'd rather have. Like when I'm looking at it, even Pat Freiermuth from Pittsburgh, if Ebron isn't really there, he's still a late option to do there. And even Evan Ingram's going historically low. Like he's going around Jarwin too. I'd rather probably grab Ingram if that was the case. So that's kind of where I'm at with them. I just don't think that offense really needs tight ends, to be honest. And it's going to be dependent on a touchdown here or there. But they're going to run, and I think Zeke's going to take away a lot of those red zone opportunities for him.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. But Kevin, you tell me which tight end is not dependent on touchdowns, not named Travis Kelce. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. Like, dude, I mean, Kyle Pitts is already ranked like, 4th tight end off the board?
Yeah.
That's how you know that tight ends are just like people are just throwing darts. Like it's like, well, I guess he'll be there. And even Pitts, like I think I have him. I know you do your stuff. I think I have him at like I think his floor, kind of where he's safe at, is like 800 yards and probably 6 touchdowns. And maybe if he can get to 60 catches, and I think realistically, if he does that, he's probably dynasty tight end 1. That's how crazy that is.
I put out a tweet last week that after the Julio trade that Kyle Pitts should go over 1,000.
Yeah, I mean he probably should, right? Like I'm trying to temper my expectations.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I think a floor of 800 is good, and if he hits 1,000, it's just gonna blow up. Like if it hits 1,000, I don't think I can be on social media anymore because people are gonna be calling him the next dynasty god. Like it's gonna be bad out there.
Yeah, man. All right, Kevin. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but one last question before I let you go. How do you see this division playing out? Where do the Dallas Cowboys finish?
Man, I think every guy you have on here is going to say we're going to win the division. What I would say is I think that the team I'm most worried about is Washington. So their defense is legit. Like they have a top defense in the NFL. I think our offense is the best in that division. So it's going to come down to us or Washington. The Eagles are trash. Eagles fans out there, you can say what you want to me, but you guys are not good. I will be honest. The Eagles are my least favorite team in the NFL of all time. Like I can get by Giants fans. Redskins fans, I have this weird, like I feel bad, or no, sorry, Washington football fans, I have this weird, I feel bad for you guys because you've been bad for so long and Snyder's there. Eagles fans, you guys could kiss my ass. Like the Eagles are just, and I have Eagles fans. I'm sorry, but you guys are disrespectful. If it wasn't for Nick Foles saving you guys, you wouldn't be nothing. Like I just can't do that. So they're going to be third or fourth, excuse me. The Giants should be third because I think Saquon's going to be there. I just don't believe in Daniel Jones. Like I don't think he's any good. And I think Fitzpatrick is going to struggle too. I mean, everybody's building Fitzpatrick up as like the next guy. And it's like, do you forget Fitzpatrick played for like 20 teams? There's a reason Fitzpatrick's played for so many teams. And I think he'll throw him out of some games. He's going to have those 4 or 5 interceptions. And I think our offense is going to be good enough to get by of our defense. So I think if we finish 10-7, we'll win the division with the Washington right behind us in a wild card spot. And then we'll make the playoffs. I think that's where I'm kind of leaning right now.
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, you are the final guest on this rundown, and so all 3 of them said Washington. You were the first person to say Dallas. Don't want to accuse you of any homerism here. I also have Dallas winning the division, so I guess I'll put that out there as well. I do have Dallas picked to win this division. So yeah, I mean, I definitely see your points there. Ryan Fitzpatrick, 8th team in how many years? I have no idea, but we have seen at times when he's been counted on to be the guy, that's when he gets Fitztragic on us. But you know, when he's the backup and he's got nothing to lose and he's playing his heart out, that's when you see the Fitz magic come out. So we'll see which Ryan Fitzpatrick we get in the 2021 season. But Kevin, thank you again for coming on. Really appreciate you. Again, make sure you're following Kevin at Daboys, DABOYS _22 on Twitter. Make sure you're checking out his work. Kevin, if I miss anything or if you have anything going on, the people need to pay specific attention to what is up. Let the people know.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. As always, great show, great podcast. You can find me on Twitter. You can always just message me. You can find my work at